Hello, hello! Ellie here. Welcome to my first ever speed draw video. Today we're going to be designing a 5-star playable Hydro Vision Jeht from Genshin Impact. It's going to be a kind of laid-back sort of video. I just kind of want to talk about the art process, talk about the character, and just kind of give a little bit of commentary as you can watch the design coming into being on the screen before you. So part of why I wanted to design this kind of version of Jeht is because she is one of, honestly, the most well-developed NPCs in the game, and I think it's a crime that she's not a playable character after all we've been through with her. In a lot of her combat, she has this kind of hydro flare, implying that she already has a vision, and I think that we also really would benefit from having more darker skinned characters in the character roster, especially after the introduction of so many NPCs who are darker skinned with Sumeru. So you can kind of see here me working through the sketch and then the more refined sketch, kind of working out all the little details. And here we are starting to come in with the inking. So for her design, I really wanted to incorporate her kind of in-game design, which is basically a not necessarily unique, but it has like a few unique touches compared to just the standard desert dweller. Oh my gosh. Yeah, if you see those distressed little faces here, you can see me just like completely forgetting how to draw braids for over an hour. It's going to be a lot shorter on this speed draw, but I was about having a mental breakdown over them. But yeah, her design is not very unique. It's basically just a slightly modified version of one of the basic desert dweller girly outfits. And so I wanted to take that and then kind of work in some unique touches, keep the same basic shapes and designs, but kind of 5-star jazz it up. And so as you can see, I've kind of made her hair a bit bigger here. We've extended some of the kind of metallics and jewelry there. She has this kind of pendant necklace thing that she wears in her original outfit, and so that's where I decided to place her vision. We went with Hydro, both because she has a Hydro flare in her in-game combat, and also because the Hydro Archon in Fontaine is the god of justice, and Jeht is all about justice. And here we've kind of got an extension of those shoulder pad's the wrong word, the shoulder armor. Oh, sorry if you hear that crash, that was my cat. Now, like most of the desert dwellers, Jeht has kind of a scarf over her eyes. My best guess is that these are to help protect from sand. It is assumed that they can see through them, so they're presumably kind of semi-transparent in some capacity. However, from a design standpoint, they do completely block out their eyes, and so I wanted to make sure that her eyes were visible, since we do have characters like Beta or Kaya who wear an eye patch, but we don't really have any characters who have their eyes completely obscured. Since Genshin Impact is a gacha game, there is a certain degree of desirability within any character designs, and so one of the aspects of that often with them is these kind of striking eye designs. Every character has something interesting about their eyes. And so I wanted to make sure that we still had some very compelling, striking eyes with Jeht. And you'll see that a bit more later on as I kind of still pay homage to the original design with kind of a veil over her eyes that I debated over a bit, ultimately decide on. And the choice of colors to kind of tie in with her outfit and the overall color scheme that I ultimately go with. So another one of the reasons that I wanted to kind of design this vision form for Jeht is that we don't have a lot of desert dweller characters in our roster. We've got Candace, Cyno, and Dea, and considering what a big part they play in the kind of main storyline and how much of the Sumeru questline is focused on the desert, I think that we just need more of them, and Jeht is a perfect candidate for adding. Now, for her weapons, I was kind of envisioning her almost as like a sword bearer in the same way that Alhaitham is, where she has her one sword and then the other one appears when her ult is in effect. With her in-game design, she has these kind of like triangular blade things that she dual wields. I wanted to kind of extend those into something that was more sword-like, that could plausibly be a 5-star weapon, that would be on the weapons banner alongside her featured banner, were she an actual 5-star character in the game. And yep, now here you can see me adding in that veil. I debated a little bit, went back and forth, and then I kind of had my roommate come over and check, and I was like, hey, does this look like garbage? And she was like, no, that's good. So I decided to ultimately go with it. And I like the way that it kind of pays homage to the original design with the kind of face scarf things that they wear, but it still allows you to see her eyes. So here you can see me adding in the flats for the colors, doing a combination of color picking and then adjusting to make sure that everything was kind of in the range that I wanted it to be. Especially when you're taking something that is a 3D image and turning it into something that is more of a flat art piece. You can't necessarily just straight up color pick, because all 3D things you're going to have, or live action images, you're going to have a certain degree of gradient. And so you're having to find like a good combination of kind of what those gradient colors are to make sure that the flat looks the same as the overall gradient to the eye. Alright, so here we have me pulling in inspiration for the color scheme. Now, because the Eternal Oasis plays such a huge part in the kind of culmination of her story at the end, I wanted to use those color schemes in her design. So much of her arc has to do with her kind of coming to terms with her multicultural identity and the complexity of her heritage, and that she is equal parts a member of, well, not really a member of the Tanit tribe, but she has heritage in the Tanit tribe, but she also has her heritage from her mom, who was a member of the academia. And that ultimately, with her kind of naming herself Jeht Ufaira Hindi after her mom and claiming that part of her heritage, but also not rejecting the side of her that is a desert dweller, was just an absolutely incredible arc. And that you had from both sides this kind of pressure to reject one part of her heritage or the other. And yeah, I didn't feel like drawing the Hydra Vision again. A while back I did a Hydra Vision Elrond from like Lord of the Rings for a friend, and I did a whole kind of rendering on a Hydra Vision for that. And so I just decided to open that back up and copy paste it over, because you know, work smarter, not harder. But yeah, about her heritage, you know, there's so much pressure within the academia for the people who are from the desert to reject that part of their heritage. And there's so much pressure from everybody in the desert to reject anything that's from the academia and from the rainforest. And with Jeht, it's like both parts are equally a part of who she is and where she came from. And there's this kind of beauty, like bittersweet beauty to her story of her learning to accept that, even though it means being like so horrifically rejected by certain people. And I mean, I don't want to spoil too much of her quest, but when I say horrifically rejected, I mean, I would put an emphasis on the horrifically, some of the stuff that she goes through. If you know, you know. But because that plays such a huge part in her story, I wanted to make sure that I worked that into her design. And so we have kind of combinations in terms of the patterns of the kind of design motifs that we see in the desert and also those that we see in the rainforest regions of Sumeru. And so as you can see, it's kind of got that mix of those geometric shapes and patterns, and then also the more kind of floral, almost mandala style designs that we see in more of the rainforest. Now here on the kind of extension of her scarf around her hair, ooh, yeah, I spend quite a bit of time putting in this little kind of geometric design here, and I ultimately scrap it because it was throwing off the balance, and I think distracting from the patterns that were on her main outfit. But for now, that's going in. Oh, yep, and there it goes. Yeah, and then I decided to kind of just stick more with what the original scarf design was. And what we ultimately ended up going with was a gradient effect. This here, it ends up being semi-transparent, and I put that on a separate layer, which will be a little more obvious once we put in the background. Some of the big themes that were explored in Sumeru was that of kind of colonialism, racism, and censorship and control of information. Now, in some cases, there was a conflict between the Archon quests and the World quests in this regard. I think the Archon quests did a much better job of kind of addressing those topics and dealing with them in a nuanced and respectful way. Some of the World quests did, but I definitely think for the most part, the Archon quests did a much better job. One of the most notable aspects of this was in the way that it was shown that kind of after all of this build-up to sort of religious fanatics and the desert dwellers being responsible for essentially attempted acts of terrorism, it turned out that they were ultimately being manipulated by the academia in order to further oppress the people of the desert. You see a lot of this kind of superiority of the academia and sort of the iron fist that was put over the people in the desert, forcibly keeping them in poverty for so long, in both in the main quest and in Jeht's world quests, but also in the little things, even in stuff like with Cyno. And as you get to know Cyno and read more on his story and what happened with him, he definitely faced that kind of pressure to conform to the rainforest and academia culture. He faced a lot of discrimination and had a much harder time working his way up in the ranks because of his desert-dwelling heritage. And you see this again with Jeht in the way that her having a dad who was from the desert and having a mom who was from the academia made it so that in a way she didn't fit into either place without rejecting a certain part of her heritage. You see this also with Sataria, who had to reject her desert heritage in order to fit in at the academia and to work her way up in the ranks there. And she was one of the rare ones who actually managed to even get into the academia, and it was at such a cost. Her arc actually ends in her returning to the desert to teach, once Nahida has stepped into the position as the Archon, and begins an initiative to bring education and resources to the desert, things which were previously highly regulated or outright illegal under the Grand Sage's rule. And I think there's something kind of incredible about that, of it not being, someone from the rainforest, not being someone from this outside culture, but, being somebody who actually, it's her people, and she's able to understand them and able to go back and take what she's learned and help with the betterment of her own society and get more in touch with her roots again. I think, honestly, that's something that's so beautiful and one of my favorite parts of the Sumeru questline. Now, in the Sumeru world quests, as opposed to the Archon quests, there are some very serious issues with racism that I don't really necessarily want to get into in this video. If you know, you know. It's the, classic cases of all the darkest skinned characters being antagonists or kind of characterized in a brutish fashion. It's the problems with a lot of the people in the desert in the world quests actually being religious fanatics, whereas in the Archon quest, it was shown that that was in fact a huge minority within the desert dwelling population. And they were just a loud minority who were being given resources, amplified, and in some cases actively manipulated and led astray by the academia in order to maintain the academia's power over the people in the desert and also over Nahida. You likewise have issues with the Aranara quest, in them referring to the people from the desert as grains of sand, and the whole interaction with Lunja, which, if you have played through the Aranara quests, then you'll know which interaction I'm talking about. It was not MiHoYo's finest moment. That being said, there are still some aspects of the Sumeru questline that dealt with the topic very tastefully and well, especially within the Archon quest. And I choose to focus on those and appreciate those, and also to understand the humanity in every person, and that within the story we are limited in our perspectives. I think there's a lot of value in being able to experience fiction without completely accepting everything that it's saying. And I think there's a lot of value in being able to recognize the good that is in certain stories while also being able to critique the areas in which they could have done better or the areas where it's just outright bad. You can, consume media without agreeing with it, and you can entertain ideas in your head without truly accepting them. And I think that's an incredibly useful thing to be able to do, both in the development of empathy for other people and also in the ability to have productive, good discourse. But I don't know, I'm pretty skeptical about the moralization of fiction consumption. Two people can love the same thing for completely different reasons, and two people can hate the same thing for completely different reasons. I think the morality of the way that we interact with fiction matters far more than the morality of that fiction itself. So here you can see adding in the shading. This is the most time-intensive step of this process. In the background there, you can see that I've kind of worked in the Ben design. I really mulled over whether to kind of include Ben itself, itself. Can't remember if Ben-Ben's a he or an it. Little robot friend. we'll say he. Because, he's just a little guy. But anyway, I wanted to kind of work in Ben himself, but I couldn't find any way to make it make sense. Ben isn't really a combat robot. He's just a little exploration boy helping to navigate the ruins. But he's so important to Jeht that I still wanted to include some kind of motif of him in there. And so that's what I ultimately decided on for the background, which is going to help give her that unique silhouette that every 5-star character has to have. Now the shading process is going to take a little while. I tried speeding it up in this video, but it got a little headache-inducing to watch because I do a lot of zooming in and zooming out and moving around through the process. So I hope you'll enjoy some nice Sumeru music as we work through the shading here. If anyone's curious, the brush that I'm using for shading here is the Gentle Paintbrush set by Umarun on Clip Studio Paint. It's a free brush, and it was such a game changer for me once I started using it. For all of the flats, I generally use the turnip brush and bucket fill tool, but Umarun's Gentle Paint brushes, they're pretty similar to the turnip pen in terms of being a nice, basic hard brush, but they have a blending effect when you put it down over another color on the layer. It works pretty similarly to Copic markers, if you're familiar with those. A lot of my art self-education through the years was doing traditional drawing with manga style Copic marker coloring, screen tones, inking, all of that fun stuff. And I think I brought a lot of the same technique when I transferred over to doing digital art. And so I was so delighted to find a brush that acted in a similar way digitally to what I liked to use with traditional mediums. Now for the shading over the sections where I have these patterns, I actually created a separate layer with just kind of that dark bluish purple with an overlay effect. And I used the blending brush from the Gentle paintbrush set to soften up the lines, because the automatic blending only happens with that if you're doing it over another color, and since on that layer it was transparent, I had to use the blending tool for that. And so you can see here me adding the shading and then doing another layer for some additional shading, just kind of to darken some of those little corners, and add in a few little highlights as well. I used this kind of warm gold color, similar to what I used for the golds here, for that highlight effect. And here we're just cleaning up that highlight and shadow layer. I'm going on to the other sleeve to do the same process. I wanted to work in the shadow from the sword to help give it that little extra bit of depth. And make sure that we get the shape. Oh yeah, there's a bit of a jump there. You know, it's not actually that obvious once I had it sped up, but there was a whole little section there of shading that I forgot to record. And here we have some extra shading on the scarf in the background, which, while it is that semi-transparent, I still wanted it to have a certain degree of shadow to it. I'm curious, for any artists who are watching this, do you use Clip Studio? And if so, what are your kind of go-to brushes when it comes to inking and coloring? and now we're going into another little stretch of just some nice detail shading. I don't really have a lot to say about this. It's just more of the same. Yeah, as you can see here with these, what I did was I did the full shading and I just let it be messy. And then I did that on a separate layer so that then I could then go down to my flats layer, select all of that color, and then do the delete outside option to clean it up before merging it down to the main shading layer. I wanted to add a little bit of a gradient on her face scarf. You can see a little reference photo hop over there. But I wanted to give it that, again, that little bit of depth without doing too much in terms of the shading on that, because I didn't want to distract from her eyes and I wanted to maintain that kind of transparent look to it. Yeah, now we're starting in on the metallic highlights and shadows. For these, I did go back to the reference photos to pick out some of the shadow and highlight colors from those because I wanted to make sure it had the proper kind of Genshin Impact palette to it. And with these, you can see I'm doing kind of a similar technique as I did with the swords of doing a full overlay layer and then doing just kind of some real messy shading and then using a combination of like select and delete and the eraser to clean it up. Really wanted to get those big kind of macro shadows with the metallics and then go in and add the smaller highlights and shadows to get that extra shine and also the particular depth on those specific parts. record again. I remember that. I was working on this over at a friend's house and I really wanted to get it done, but I had a kind of social outing to go to. So I just brought my tablet with me. And then I promptly forgot to record the whole first section of what I did while over at that friend's house. Whew! There's all the metallics. And I'm finally moving on. You can see here I'm going to add a glow to the swords. Kind of give them a similar sort of luminescence as the Hydro Vision to give them that elemental power. For this, I did a combination of some overlay layers with a slight blur, and here you can see me kind of doing a whole bunch of adjustments until I get the overall kind of vibe that I'm going for. Similar process to what I did for the Hydro Vision. Here you can see me doing some little touch-ups. And now it is finally onto that Ben background. I turned on the grid for this one because I wanted to make sure that I got some nice, strong geometric shapes to it. Do a little bit of canvas turning, reference images, using that sweet straight line tool. And here we go with the inside patterns. Now for these, I created a separate layer to do these curved parts. And then I just created one, did a nice little copy paste. See, retrospectively, I could have done just the entirety of one design and then copy pasted that whole thing, but at this point we were going on, I think, like hour 11 or 12. It wasn't all done in one day, but good lord was I starting to absolutely lose my mind over this whole process. Here, just doing some little touch-ups. Few minor adjustments, and there is our Ben background. Got just a tiny bit of a fade in there to that overlay. Sort of going in the opposite of what our background is, from light to dark rather than from dark to light. And whoop, getting rid of my reference layers, cropping it in. And here we are, adding finally the Hydro Flare. Going back to the eye highlights, which at this point I realized I'd forgotten. few last little adjustments, kind of touch up. Oop, don't know what happened there. Probably accidentally bucket filled my entire layer. Right, and here we go. So I started off with kind of combinations of the soft paintbrush and the turnip tool, and then ended up using back to our gentle paintbrush, and then I used a combination of the kind of fingertip and the painterly blender tools to get this kind of soft smudge look to the water to blend in. And after that, we went over with, again, our beautiful gentle paintbrush to get some nice round highlights here. And then you can see here working a little bit with the gouache brush for getting a little bit more of those highlights and shadows into the water to try and give it that sort of liquid look to it. I did a bit of trying to study the way that Genshin characters' designs did water, and I'm honestly not very experienced at drawing water digitally, and so it took a bit of fussing. I'm pretty happy with how it ultimately turned out. Back when I did that Hydro Vision Genshin style Elrond, I also had to do water for that, and so I kind of tried to take some of what I learned from that and apply it to this one as well. I mostly wanted to make sure that it looked like water and that it still maintained a distinctive shape for the sake of that silhouette. And so here we are finishing that up. Alright, now I want you to imagine for a moment that you're breaking the Primogem Bank. You've just put in your wishes. You're waiting to see those stars falling down. The star turns gold, and there she is. Our girl. So, what do you think of my Hydro 5-star vision-bearing Jeht design? Would you wish for her? What do you think of Jeht as a character? And are there any other Genshin NPCs you'd like to see me design a vision form for? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had just as much fun and far less stress watching this as I had drawing it. It was about a 14-hour process, but I'm really, really happy with how it turned out. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like. If you'd like to support me in this channel, consider leaving a tip on my Ko-fi linked down below. If you'd like to see more videos like this, and also not like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find the posted version of this Jeht design on my Tumblr and Instagram, both linked down below. And you can also join me on Thursdays for a Genshin Impact replay over on Twitch from 4 to 6 p.m. PST. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful, wonderful day.